Hi, and welcome back to College Questions. My name is Nick. I'm an independent educational consultant and founder of Dawes Academics Consulting, LLC. My job is to help students and families navigate the college admissions process and hopefully make the whole journey a little bit less stressful and more fun for all involved. Well, this week I want to talk about when you should take the SAT and ACT. Last week I talked a little bit about the digital SAT and how it's different from the paper SAT, and how you should think about Algebra 2 and use that as a way to determine when you should take the SAT. And so last week for the digital test, I said if you're a sophomore, just take the digital test after it comes out, you'll be fine. But if you're a junior and you haven't taken Algebra 2 yet, that's going to cause you some problems. And all that really means is it's just going to make it a little bit more difficult for you to prepare for the math section. So this week I wanted to talk about when to take the test in general, regardless of whether it's the digital test or the paper test, and just give you a general guideline for how to plan that out. Because having to figure out when to start preparing for different aspects of admissions is the root cause of a lot of stress. Often people will prefer to over prepare rather than be under prepared. And so you'll begin working on parts of the preparation earlier than you should. In the case of standardized testing, this can actually hurt you. There are only so many practice tests and only so many testing resources out there that do a good job of mimicking the way that the actual SAT and actual ACT ask you questions. And if you start prepping too early, you're going to exhaust those useful resources well before you're ready to actually sit down and take the test for real. The other problem is that if you start prepping early and then you don't sit and take the test and take it 2, maybe 3 times, the longer the gap between when you prep and when you take the test, the less effective that preparation tends to be. You'll forget how to manage certain question types the longer you go without actively practicing for the test. Standardized test taking is a skill, and so you do need to sort of flex those muscles a little bit before you sit to take the exam. You might think that the answer to your problem is if you're going to prepare early, take the test early too. Done, right? And this will sort of solve that problem of having a lag time between prepping for the ACT or SAT and taking the ACT or SAT. But signing up too early to take the test has its own problems. So let's talk about why you shouldn't take the test as a sophomore. The first thing is to consider that math section that I already mentioned. The SAT leans heavily on Algebra 2. Most students, not all, but most, are on an accelerated math track. And so you might finish Algebra 2 your sophomore year, in which case you might think, hey, I'm done with Algebra 2. It's fine. And that might be true. But for some people, Algebra 2 might be the course that they take for math junior year. And so trying to take the SAT before you finish Algebra 2 is going to make your life more difficult. Waiting until you are at least halfway through Algebra 2 before you take the exam is going to give you your best shot at doing well. The same is true for the ACT and geometry. The ACT has way more geometry on it than the SAT. And so making sure that you've taken geometry and that you're comfortable with maybe a few Algebra 2 concepts. The ACT will have a little bit of Algebra 2, but not very much. So that's the biggest problem. The other problem is that the ACT doesn't give you the reference sheet with all the formulas on it that the SAT gives you. And so if you're not really comfortable with your geometry concepts and your geometry formulas, you're going to have a harder time taking the actual math section on the ACT. The other area that we need to be concerned with when we're trying to take the test early is reading. Okay. The reality is that even really voracious readers aren't well equipped to handle the SAT reading section. I mean, after all, how many students choose to sit down and read James Madison's Federalist 51? Or how many students choose to sit and read Jane Austen? You need to be able to do those things in order to grapple with some of the older passages that the reading section might throw at you, and to deal with older syntax and older vocabulary. You could be reading English on the SAT or ACT that's 200 years old, and you might not have the same experience as a sophomore as you will as a junior, a rising senior even, with those sorts of English. You might deal with American lit and, 17th and 18th century literature your junior year. And so if you take the SAT before you've experienced those things, you might not be as prepared for the reading passages as you would be if you waited to take the test later. So if you shouldn't take it as a sophomore, when should you take the SAT and ACT? And again, for accelerated math students, I generally recommend preparing for the SAT over the summer before your junior year. You've finished Algebra 2 as a sophomore, and then you can start to take the SAT or ACT once school begins in September. You could even take the SAT in August if you wanted to, but there's no August ACT. I would recommend that you try, for accelerated math students, try to finish the SAT or ACT by December so that the second half of your junior year and the summer after your junior year, you can be focused on colleges, college searching, college applications, essay writing, and all of those things. Doing it this way also gives you a slight advantage for the PSAT that you'll take in October as a junior. If you start prepping the summer before junior year, then you are as ready as you're going to be for the SAT when you take the PSAT, which is going to give you a chance to score higher on the PSAT and potentially qualify for a national merit scholarship, right? You could become a recognized scholar or commended scholar, or be a finalist for some of the scholarship money towards the end of your junior year. That could be $2,500 towards your books and fees at whatever college you choose to apply to or choose to enroll in. And then if you finish taking the SAT and ACT in December, that gives you January through April to prepare for your AP tests, because junior year is usually the year where students are really loaded down with a lot of APs. So that sort of gives you the best of both worlds. You focus on your standardized tests in the fall, you finish your SAT, you take the PSAT, you do as well as you can, and then in the winter and spring, you're really focused on those AP tests. Perfect. For traditional math students, the timeline's going to be a little bit tighter. You're not going to start preparing for the SAT or ACT until winter break, your junior year, which means your PSAT is going to be that. It's going to be practice. And then you will start preparing over winter break. That'll give you a nice couple weeks or a few weeks, depending on your school, to get some solid preparation in for a few weeks before school resumes and you have to juggle test prep and classes again. But you can at least get a good jump start over winter break. And then you should start taking the SAT or ACT in February, March. Take it in February or March. And then regardless of what score you get, pause. March, April is AP prep. Spend that time prepping for your AP classes. Make sure your grades are still good so that those first 2 weeks of May, you're focused on your AP tests and you do well on those. Once those AP tests are done, then it's finals and test prep again. And then you can try to take the SAT again in June or the ACT in July after you've had a few more weeks to sort of warm those standardized testing muscles back up with a little bit of practice after your APs are over. And then if you really need the additional prep, if you're still not happy with your score, you have some time over summer and you can take the August SAT or the September ACT. And by then you should be done. You should be finished with test prep. You should be done taking the test and really turn your attention towards college essays, college applications, and all of those sorts of things. In either case, I tend not to recommend students take the SAT or ACT more than thrice, more than 3 times. Taking it more than that might signal that you have skewed priorities. Like you're spending 20 hours, 40 hours, 60 hours prepping for this test, and then you're taking this test over and over again when you could be using that time to volunteer in your community or to work on passion projects or other extracurriculars, right? You don't want to focus so heavily on AP tests, grades, and test scores that you completely ignore the things that make you unique from other students. And after 3 to 4 attempts, your scores are unlikely to increase dramatically unless you take, a solid like 3 months and do some serious learning and serious test prep. And then you could maybe try again and maybe see your score go up. But after your third, maybe fourth test administration, you've probably reached the point where your scores are about as good as they're going to get. And so it's not worth the time and effort to try and increase those any further. So, in summary, taking the SAT or ACT too early can cause problems. You're going to run out of testing material to prep with, and you might not be ready for the reading level. You might not be ready for the level of difficulty of the math. The benchmark is Algebra 2. When you finish Algebra 2 is when you should start thinking about prepping for the test. But again, I usually recommend students wait until the summer before junior year if they're on an accelerated math track. And then you will be prepped and ready to take the SAT in the fall of your junior year when you're taking your PSAT 11, which is the National Merit Scholarship qualifying test. Then you can turn and focus on APs. If you're a traditional math student, you'll start prepping in the winter of your junior year and you'll take the SAT kind of sandwiched around your AP tests. Trying to take the test too early is going to cause stress for you, your family, everybody involved. It's not going to necessarily be fun. Not that test taking is fun, but the experience will be worse for you. And whatever the score ends up being, stop taking the SAT or ACT after August or September your senior year. By then, your priorities should be shifted towards your applications and your essays, and you should be looking towards getting those applications in on time, if not early, and thinking about the other pieces of your application. Remember, the test score is just one piece of your application. It's one piece of your profile, and it's not even the most important piece. And you can apply test optional if you need to, so don't worry about that part. The test should be one other way for you to highlight and showcase your academic abilities. That is all. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions that you want me to answer in a future video, or you're looking for particular feedback, you can email me at collegequestions@dawesacademics.com. That is DAWES academics.com. And I hope you'll stick around for our next video next week about whether or not you should submit your SAT scores and ACT scores to every college that you apply to, and how to decide when you might want to submit them and when you might not want to submit them. And with that, I'll see you next week.